There's always a foggy town that instills a certain fear, cryptic puzzles within that tense atmosphere, and an underlying trauma to ground the chilling horror. I had an inkling that Silent Hill Townfall could nail the series' particular style of horror, and after getting 3 hours of hands-on time with it, I'm thrilled to say my intuition was spot on. This being in first person definitely sparked the thought of what PT could have been, because my time with Townfall showed that the more intimate interaction with the environment can bring you closer to both the story it's trying to tell and the gameplay elements that give rise to such dread. I came in thinking Townfall would be just another direction the series could explore, but I came away eager for whatever comes after the end of my preview demo. Silent Hill Townfall is developed by Screenburn, which was previously known as No Code, the crew that made the space thriller Observation, and it has a direct lineage with Alien Isolation. Director John McKellen worked on it and directed its DLC, and it's a pretty clear inspiration for Townfall in terms of it being first person, and the way it builds tension through feeling vulnerable as the player, having to rely on stealth before using combat as a last-ditch effort. This is also a Silent Hill that's representative of the studio itself. Townfall takes place in the 1990s in a fictional setting called St. Amelia and closely reflects seaside towns of Scotland, where the team is from. While these ports tend to be quite foggy to begin with, its density is intensified as you uncover how a close-knit community fell apart from what seems to be a disease and mutation that ravaged its people and turned them into monstrous mutants. Playing as Simon Ordell, you're a fish out of water as an American mysteriously washed ashore in a Scottish town. He's got an IV hooked up to his hand, and he's searching for a nurse named Zoe Ellis who lives in St. Amelia. She reaches out to him through a radio device he relies on called the CRTV, guiding him through vague, desperate voice lines. And when you get to her house, you see a portrait of Simon in her upstairs hallway. Something weird is going on here. When I asked McKellen about this dynamic of having an American lead character, he said there's a good reason for it. While he couldn't give away more because of spoilers, he said it'll help players connect to him, being an outsider exploring a foreign town to unravel a mystery that Simon is just as much in the dark about.
Simon?
The CRTV is the main crux of Townfall's gameplay. Every Silent Hill uses a radio as a key item, and Townfall follows suit, but there are key differences here that bring you closer to the world itself. Because it has a screen, it's your visual guide for where to go and what to do. You can pull it up at any time, and after tuning it for your next objective, the CRTV screen shows short, disconnected clips of buildings or alleyways you should see on your path to progress. This pushed me to really pay attention to the environment in a way having objective markers or a minimap could never really do. Simon has a physical map of the town you can pull out as well, which he'll automatically mark up based on story progress and clues you uncover in lieu of having a traditional quest log. I already felt like I had a deeper connection with the cobblestone streets and narrow alleys of St. Amelia just from the demo. My favorite thing about the CRTV, however, is the way it's used to solve puzzles. I remember the pharmacy section so distinctly because it felt like a riddle and scavenger hunt that you're eager to solve because you think you already know how to get to the solution. I had to devise the 4-number combination to open a lock for a key item. Seems like pretty standard stuff, right? After having to color tune the CRTV, it kept showing me a series of seemingly unrelated close-ups of objects within the pharmacy. Each clip and object represented a number for the lock, and upon closer inspection, without explanation or hand-holding, I was able to determine what these clues were communicating. It's that level of trust Townfall has that you can figure out what it's trying to tell you. There's one in an earlier section that's like an escape room that tees up this idea, where you have to look at photos on the wall, journal entries, and markings on a calendar to unlock the door and get out. This particular style of puzzle design lends itself extremely well to the first-person perspective because it's able to let those subtleties in the environment be part of the solution. Something McKellen also emphasized in our conversation is that puzzles themselves are designed to be part of the story too, where the clues and solutions tell you about the characters or what happened in the town to help you develop an understanding without having to say things out loud. Now, Townfall wouldn't be much of a horror game if the lingering dread wasn't backed by a creeping threat. In this early chapter, I only had 2x4 wooden planks and a super loud revolver with limited ammo to defend myself from the mutated monsters sprinkled throughout the streets. So stealth is kind of the main weapon here, and that's where the CRTV comes in again. Enemies show up as radio signals, and you have to manually tune it to mark them on the CRTV, which lets you see them on the screen and through walls when pointing it in their direction. Once they're marked, you can cycle through them quickly without having to manually tune it again, but keeping track of which enemy was which on the frequency bar became a bit of a pain when 4 or 5 of them were within range. However, I found this to be a sensible way to even the playing field with stealth, letting me monitor patrol patterns from safety before making a dash for it. If you think this makes things sound too easy, well, it doesn't. Instead, it eases the sort of trial and error nature of stealth-focused games while still challenging you. You can take calculated risks or plan a course of action without having to bang your head against the wall over and over again. It's all the more important because combat isn't exactly Townfall's strength. Not that I expected it to be, but it's a last resort for a reason. You have a basic attack and block with melee weapons, which aren't quite as responsive as I'd hoped, and enemy attacks are a little tough to read. First-person melee combat is hard to get right, and the revolver Simon finds early on only has so many rounds, and it's loud as hell, alerting everything in range. But as long as Townfall keeps the balance I saw in the demo, I don't think it'll be a problem. There are several closets and sheds throughout town you can run and hide in as well, so getting caught and chased doesn't always have to result in combat. This isn't meant to be Resident Evil after all, and thanks to Simon just being a regular guy who has no idea what's going on, it makes sense in the grand scheme. The aforementioned pharmacy section is connected to a series of puzzles scattered around town that'll have you pulling up your map pretty frequently to make sure you're making the correct turns at every street. As inconvenient as it is, I enjoy the fact that something like finding a house whose address you got from a note is part of what you do here. It may get confusing on where to go exactly, and if it leads to mistakenly backtracking, the pacing can drag, making it all the more important to pay attention to what Simon marks on the map. Later in the demo, when the sky inexplicably turns a deep red and the mutated beings come out in droves, navigating the town's backyards and apartment complex to make it to the hospital is more of a zombie-riddled maze. Bobbing and weaving between monsters, creating distractions, or trying to land desperate shots become more of the emphasis. It's not necessarily my favorite part of Townfall, but it balances out the more unnerving quietness that preceded it. It's intense, and it can be exhausting, but the good kind. Any horror game worth its salt is going to drain you, and I came away from Townfall with that feeling. But it's that broader message tucked underneath the horrors that I'm looking forward to most. The story opening with abandoned protest signs calling out an organization called the CEG makes it pretty clear that this small town was overrun by corporate interests, and it led to something catastrophic that mutated its people. I explored more about the character Zoe Ellis in this demo though, her mental breakdown, how she feels about letting down her colleagues at the hospital and clinic, and her regrets of not being able to save her people. All that is apparent in the emails, notes, and letters left behind that tell you about her relationships to the townsfolk, and it's shown in the main puzzle solution in the section I played, which centered around her perceived failures. These kinds of motifs have been what made Silent Hill strong in the past, and I'm quite fond of the direction the series has been going recently, leaning into the idea of being an anthology series where different parts of the world get to tell their kinds of stories wrapped in a consistent theme and style of horror. The Silent Hill 2 remake definitely modernized a classic about a man's mental illness and how that has destroyed everything around him, and most recently, Silent Hill F explored the struggles of womanhood in Japan in the 1960s. So there's certainly more to unravel with Townfall, including how Simon relates to everything in the story, and I can't wait to see how it all comes together and fits into the rest of the series. The terrifying contrast between the bloodstained and rusted corridors of a hospital and the deeply unsettling fog of the original Silent Hill on PS1, those are images that still stick with me to this day. It's probably the most horrifying experience I've ever had in a game, and well, I was a kid at the time, but it paved the way for what I actually find scary. It's that confluence of psychological and analog horror that evokes things like Number Stations or the video series Local 58, and I'm picking up bits of that from Townfall. Few games deliver that foreboding, lingering dread quite like a good Silent Hill, and it seems Screenburn has understood the assignment. We'll be able to find out the truth about St. Amelia, if we can survive it, when Silent Hill Townfall launches on September 24th for PlayStation 5 and PC. And for more on upcoming survival horror games, check out my initial impressions of both Hellraiser Revival and Resident Evil Veronica, and for everything else in the world of games, stick with IGN.